The Janet Napoles 10 billion peso pork scam led to the abolition of the 24.5 billion peso PDAF allocation in the proposed 2014 national budget. The said amount will be realigned to several departments where legislators can still request funding for projects and programs which will benefit their constituents. The question is, was the PDAF abolished for good? And joining us tonight on Professor Prospero De Vera, one of the country's top political analysts. Good evening, sir, and welcome to NewsLife.
Good evening.
Sir, will the deletion of the 24.5 billion peso PDAF allocation in 2014 mean the pork is gone for good?
Not really. In terms of the definition of what pork is, it is still basically out of money that the legislators have some level of participation in terms of identification of projects. I think the step of the House to allocate it to specific agencies is an improvement over the existing system, because now it is restricted to only a few departments and avoids the more notorious departments like the Department of Agriculture and DNR, which was embroiled in the controversy. But in terms of discretion, there is still discretion allowed for legislators, because they're still going to submit projects, for example, for infrastructure to the PWA, except the projects are defined in advance.
But aren't those projects also even defined before in a menu? How do you think this would be different from the old PDAF system?
It's different on two levels. First, it is different in terms of restricting the choices, because now you limit it to the DPWH for infrastructure, for the Department of Labor, CHED, the DepEd, and the SWD. So that's one. Before, the range of departments that can implement the project is wider. The second is that the list is given ahead of time. For example, for DPWH, I think the objective is for the legislators to identify infrastructure projects while the budget deliberation is going on, so they become part of the General Appropriations Act when it is approved. So you already have in the GAA a list of the infrastructure projects of time. Before, in the former PDAF, the amounts were given through the 4 quarters of the year, and legislators can submit projects any time during the year. Now they have to submit it ahead of the budget year.
Now, looking at this, do you think this will do away with the abuse and misuse of pork done in the past, and will line item budgeting solve the problem?
It will address some of the problems before, like you would not have projects going to NGOs anymore. I do not agree with that idea, but at least you take away one of the biggest problems that have been created in terms of accrediting NGOs. Number two, it avoids the types of projects that are prone to corruption. For example, projects in the Department of Agriculture, like farmers' assistance, livelihood assistance, because these are the types of projects that are very difficult to monitor and very difficult to accredit the recipients. So in that sense, it's an improvement over the previous amount. The problem with the new system is it requires legislators to identify way in advance needs at the local level, and sometimes these needs cannot be predicted the year before. So it restricts the ability of legislators to respond to problems as they come during the year. For example, if you identify infrastructure projects the year before, if suddenly during the year there's a massive flood, for example, in your district, and the infrastructure in the district is destroyed, you won't have the ability anymore in the middle or towards the third part of the year to be able to allocate resources for the repair of this. For example, if there's a flood, farm-to-market roads get wiped out. A legislator would not be able to identify these washed-out roads the year before. Can only identify it after the flood. So this limits the ability of legislators to respond to needs that come during the year.
Sir, you mentioned a while ago that it's still difficult to monitor. What do you think is the best way to monitor these funds that they're spent wisely?
Well, you can require that these projects be posted online, printed papers, made accessible to everyone by identifying, for example, in terms of infrastructure, identifying not only the location of the project, but even the companies that win the bid, for example, and mobilizing local communities to watch over the projects. The infra type would probably be the easiest to monitor because you can see whether there is infra or not.
Yes.
But in terms of the other projects, like scholarships, for example, or those that go to the SWD, you will need not just transparency in the projects, but you need to empower communities to monitor the projects throughout the year.
Sir, now finally, with the filing of charges against several senators and former legislators, will this send a strong message that corruption will not thrive under the Aquino administration? Well,
it depends. If the ombudsman, after reviewing the records, really finds finds sufficient cause to file charges, that's number one. And number two, whether the evidence generated so far by the Department of Justice and the NBI would stand the scrutiny, for example, when the charges are actually filed. You know, accusing is one thing, or filing cases is one thing. Proving them in court is more difficult. I am a little worried by the statement of the Ombudsman that it will take about a year to go through the records, go through the evidence, and file charges. I don't think the general public is willing to wait for 1 year for charges to be filed. I think everyone expects that this is done immediately because, remember, this is not the only politicians in question. There's still a list of other politicians that are alleged to be recipients also of bogus NGOs and public funds. So if the next batch is identified and the documents are sent to the Ombudsman, if it will take another year to do that, the public may be impatient and will demand faster results.
Okay, on that note, thank you very much for joining us tonight here at NewsLife. That was Professor Prospero De Vera, one of the country's top political analysts. Thank you, sir.